My sister tried to steal my inherited beach house using fake city violations. Hi everyone! Today's story will blow your mind, but really quick, if you enjoy this content, hit that subscribe button. Channel's been a bit quiet lately, and your support keeps it all going. Let's jump in. Original post, posted to r/relationships. I don't even know where to begin with this situation, but I need to get it off my chest and maybe get some perspective from strangers on the internet because I feel like I'm losing my mind. I'm a 32-year-old marine wildlife biologist, and I've dedicated my entire adult life to studying ocean ecosystems. It's not a lucrative career. I make about $58,000 a year through research grants and occasional teaching assignments at the local university. But I love what I do. I spend my days studying tide pools, tracking species migration patterns, and documenting the effects of climate change on intertidal zones. It's important work, even if it doesn't pay well. 2 years ago, my grandmother passed away. She was 93 years old and lived her entire life on the Oregon coast. She was a science teacher for 40 years, and she's the one who inspired my love for marine biology. When I was 7, she took me to the tide pools for the first time, teaching me to identify different species of anemones, showing me how hermit crabs exchange shells, and explaining the delicate balance of these miniature ecosystems. That day changed my life forever. In her will, she left me her beach cottage. It's not much to look at, a small 2-bedroom structure built in 1947, with cedar shingle siding weathered gray by decades of salt air, a stone fireplace that we've never been able to get to draw properly, and windows that rattle when the winter storms hit. But it sits on a half-acre of land with direct beach access, and more importantly, it's positioned near some of the most biodiverse tide pools on the entire Pacific coast. My sister, who's 2 years older than me at 34, received an equivalent cash inheritance. She seemed fine with the arrangement at the time. She even said at the reading of the will that it made sense for me to have the cottage since I was the science nerd of the family and could actually use it for my work. She took her inheritance and put a down payment on a larger house in the city where she works as a code enforcement officer for the municipal building department. For the first year and a half, everything was perfect. I used the cottage as my research base, spending about 15 days a month there during peak research seasons. I maintained it exactly as our grandmother had, the same pale yellow trim paint she'd chosen in the 1980s, the same rose bushes she'd planted along the front path, even the same arrangement of driftwood sculptures in the garden that she'd collected over the decades. I also opened the cottage to graduate students from my university who needed accommodation while conducting their own research. 3 doctoral candidates have used it as a base for their dissertations, and countless undergraduates have spent weekends there learning field research techniques. The cottage has become an informal field station, contributing to legitimate scientific research that's been published in peer-reviewed journals. Then, 3 months ago, everything changed. It started with a single violation notice from the city. According to the notice, my fence exceeded the maximum height limit by 2 inches. This seemed absurd. The fence has been the same height since my grandfather built it in 1962. I have photographs from every decade showing it hasn't changed. I figured it was a simple mistake, so I sent a response with the documentation and thought that would be the end of it. But 2 weeks later, I received another notice. This time, they claimed my native beach grass was creating a visibility hazard and needed to be cut back. This beach grass is actually protected habitat for several species of nesting birds. Cutting it would be an environmental violation, not to mention destroying important erosion control. Again, I responded with documentation, including a letter from the State Environmental Protection Agency confirming the grass was protected. The violations began accelerating after that. Every few days, a new notice would arrive. My research equipment shed was supposedly unpermitted, despite having a permit from 1978 clearly displayed on the structure. The cottage's exterior paint was not within the approved coastal palette, even though it hadn't been repainted since my grandmother chose the color from the city's own approved list decades ago. The stone pathway to the beach was encroaching on public access, despite being entirely on my property with survey markers to prove it. Each violation came with fines. First, they were small, $500 here, $750 there. But they quickly escalated. The city claimed my cottage's foundation was encroaching on public beach access by 18 inches and demanded either the entire structure be moved back at an estimated cost of $380,000 or face daily fines of $500. When I provided survey records from 1947, 1973, and 2019 all showing the cottage in the exact same position, they ignored them. The stress began affecting my work. I was spending all my time responding to violations instead of conducting research. I had to cancel a presentation at a marine biology conference because I was meeting with the city planning department. My current study on ocean acidification's effects on mollusks, funded by a National Science Foundation grant, was falling behind schedule. That's when I made the mistake of calling my sister for help. I thought, surely, working in code enforcement herself, she could provide insight into what was happening or maybe even intervene on my behalf. Her response chilled me to the bone. She laughed, actually laughed, and said, "Maybe the universe is trying to tell you something. That cottage is more trouble than it's worth." When I explained that I needed the cottage for my research, she became dismissive. "You're too attached to that old place," she said. "You could conduct your research from anywhere on the coast. Besides, do you have any idea what that property is worth? You're sitting on a gold mine and counting fish while you could be set for life." Then she mentioned, almost too casually, that she knew someone who might be interested in buying it. "A developer friend of mine would probably give you $450,000 for it, violations and all. Cash deal, quick close. You could be free of this headache by next month." The cottage and land are worth at least $1.2 million in the current market, possibly more given the direct beach access and lot size. Her friend's offer was insulting. But more than that, something about her tone, her timing, the way she immediately had a buyer ready, it all felt wrong. The violations continued to pile up. They claimed my documented research activities constituted commercial use in a residential zone. Never mind that I don't charge anyone anything, that it's all academic research funded by grants, or that educational use is explicitly permitted under the zoning code. The fines for this violation alone were $15,000. They then declared my grandmother's sea glass window, a beautiful installation she created in the 1960s from glass she'd collected over decades, was a structural hazard requiring immediate replacement at an estimated cost of $15,000. This window survived the 1964 tsunami that devastated much of the Oregon coast. It's been inspected multiple times over the years and deemed sound. But suddenly, it's dangerous? I've now accumulated $47,000 in fines. The city has threatened to place a lien on the property if I don't pay within 30 days. My research salary barely covers my regular expenses, let alone tens of thousands in arbitrary fines. I've maxed out my credit cards trying to keep up. My car needs repairs I can't afford. I'm eating ramen noodles for dinner while trying to fight off a municipal government that seems determined to destroy me. Last week, my sister called again. This time she was more direct. "Look," she said, "I know this is hard, but you're being stubborn. That developer friend I mentioned, he's increased his offer to $500,000. That's more than enough to pay off your fines and start fresh somewhere else. You could rent a nice apartment near the university, maybe even put a down payment on a condo. Why are you making this so difficult?" When I told her I wasn't selling, she got angry. Really angry. She called me selfish, said I was wasting family resources on playing in tide pools like a child, and accused me of thinking I was better than everyone else because I had a PhD. Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "You're going to lose that cottage one way or another. You might as well get something for it." I started documenting everything after that call. Every violation notice, every interaction with the city, every conversation with my sister. I also started researching other properties in the coastal district. What I found was disturbing. In the past 2 years, over 60 waterfront properties had received similar cascading violations. Most sold within 6 months for well below market value. The buyers were various LLCs, but with some digging through public records, I found they all had connections to the same parent company, Coastal Premier Development. Guess whose name appeared on Coastal Premier Development's company holiday party photos on social media? My sister's boyfriend of the past year. A man she'd never introduced to the family, whom she'd barely mentioned except in passing. Suddenly, her insider knowledge and ready buyer made horrible sense. Update 1. 3 weeks later. I want to thank everyone who responded to my original post. Your advice to hire a private investigator and find a lawyer who works on contingency was invaluable. I've done both, and the rabbit hole goes deeper than I ever imagined. The private investigator, a former FBI agent who specializes in municipal corruption cases, began by analyzing patterns in the code violations across the coastal district. He identified 67 properties that had been targeted with escalating violations similar to mine. Of those, 43 were sold within 6 months, all significantly below market value. The average loss to the property owners was $400,000 per property. Every single one of these below-market sales went to one of 3 LLCs, Coastal Premier Holdings, Seafront Investment Group, or Pacific Paradise Properties. Corporate records show all 3 are owned by Coastal Premier Development, whose CEO is the father of my sister's boyfriend. But that connection, while damning, was just the beginning. The investigator pulled security footage from the city building where my sister works. She has key card access to the building, and the logs show her entering after hours on dozens of occasions, always on weekends or holidays when the building was empty. Each time she accessed the building after hours, new violation reports would appear in the system within 48 hours, all for coastal properties. We subpoenaed the metadata from the city's violation database. It shows that my sister personally created over 200 violation reports for properties where no inspector had actually visited. She would backdate them, assign them to inspectors who were on vacation or had recently retired, and process them through the system. She had administrator access that allowed her to bypass the normal approval process. The phone records were particularly damning. 2 days before each violation notice I received, my sister had lengthy calls with her boyfriend's number. The day after I'd receive a notice, she'd call me with her sympathetic advice to sell. The pattern was consistent across all 67 targeted properties: calls to coordinate the violation, then calls to the property owner to help. My lawyer has filed a federal lawsuit. We're not just suing for damages, we're pursuing RICO charges for organized corruption and racketeering. The FBI has officially opened an investigation. As it turns out, they've been monitoring Coastal Premier Development for 2 years on suspicion of money laundering and foreign investment fraud, but they couldn't prove the inside connection to the city. Our evidence was the missing piece they needed. The investigator also uncovered something that broke my heart in a different way. My sister had specifically targeted our grandmother's cottage from the beginning. In text messages with her boyfriend, she called it the crown jewel and said she deserved it more than her sister who wastes her life playing with fish. She wrote that family was just an obstacle and that I was too stupid to see the opportunity. She knew exactly what the cottage meant to me. She was there when I defended my dissertation, using 5 years of data collected from those very tide pools. She attended the ceremony when the university recognized my research on climate change impacts on intertidal ecosystems. She'd even brought her children to the cottage for weekend visits, where I taught them about marine life just as our grandmother had taught us. She knew all of this, and she still tried to destroy it. The city has suspended her with pay pending an investigation, but we all know where this is heading. Her boyfriend disappeared 3 days after the FBI investigation was announced. His social media accounts are deleted, his phone is disconnected, and his apartment is empty according to neighbors. The Coastal Premier Development website now shows only a "under construction" message. Other victims have started coming forward. An elderly couple in their 80s was forced to sell their home of 50 years for $300,000 under market value after being hit with $75,000 in violations. A young family with 3 children lost their inherited cottage when they couldn't afford the fines while also paying for their child's cancer treatment. A retired teacher who'd spent her entire savings on a small beach house for her retirement was driven to bankruptcy by fabricated violations. Each story is heartbreaking, but they all share common elements: sudden, escalating violations that seem to come from nowhere, insider information about their financial situations that suggested someone knew exactly how much pressure to apply, and immediate cash offers from mysterious buyers the moment they showed signs of breaking. Update 2 months later. The arrests happened at dawn. The FBI arrested my sister at her home while her children were still asleep. They also arrested 3 city council members, 2 planning department supervisors, and 14 other city employees who were part of the conspiracy. The CEO of Coastal Premier Development was arrested at his private jet as he tried to leave the country. The federal prosecutor laid out the scope of the conspiracy at the press conference. Over 3 years, this criminal organization had stolen over $27 million in property value from innocent homeowners. They destroyed families, bankrupted retirees, and attempted to transform protected coastal areas into luxury developments that would have devastated the local ecosystem. My sister was charged with 247 counts of fraud, corruption, conspiracy, and racketeering. Each count carries potential prison time. The prosecutor told me she's looking at 12 to 15 years in federal prison if convicted, possibly more if the judge considers the breach of public trust as an aggravating factor. During her initial appearance, she tried to blame everyone but herself. According to the prosecutor, she claimed she was just trying to provide for her family, and that she was manipulated by sophisticated criminals. When confronted with the evidence of her specifically targeting family members and friends, she actually said they should be grateful she was trying to improve their financial situations. The evidence presented was overwhelming. They had emails where she joked about making bank off beachfront idiots, and called me specifically too wrapped up in her stupid fish to see sense. There were spreadsheets where she tracked each property's value, the owner's financial situation, and exactly how much pressure would force a sale. My cottage had notes: sentimental value high, financial resources low, increasing pressure should work within 4 to 6 months. She'd made approximately $240,000 from the scheme, receiving 2% of each forced sale to Coastal Premier Development. She used the money to buy a new Tesla, take European vacations, and completely renovate her house. All while I was eating instant noodles and watching my life's work crumble under the weight of her fabricated fines. Her husband filed for divorce the day after her arrest. He submitted evidence to the prosecutor showing she'd hidden the bribe money from him in secret accounts. He's taking their children and moving to Montana to live with his parents. The children, aged 8 and 10, don't understand why their mother was taken away. They probably never will fully understand how she could choose greed over everything else. The city offered me a settlement of $4.2 million to avoid a longer lawsuit. My lawyer advised accepting it, with conditions. We demanded not just compensation but systemic change, new oversight procedures, independent review of all code violations, and protection for the coastal areas that were targeted for development. Update 3, 4 months later. The trial is over. My sister was convicted on all charges. The judge called her actions a calculated betrayal of public trust that damaged not just property values but the very fabric of community faith in government. She was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole before serving at least 10 years and 2 months. I attended every day of the trial. I needed to see it through, to understand how someone I grew up with could become this person. She never once looked at me. During her statement to the court, she continued to blame others: the boyfriend who manipulated her, the city that didn't pay her enough, the property owners who were too stubborn to see opportunity. The judge actually interrupted her to point out that her lack of remorse was making her situation worse. When evidence was presented about my cottage specifically, the prosecutor showed text messages where she called me a sanctimonious bitch who thinks she's saving the world one fish at a time, and said she couldn't wait to see my face when I realized I'd lost everything. She'd even taken photos of me during family dinners, circling my grandmother's jewelry in red and writing, "She doesn't deserve any of it." The city ultimately settled for $4.8 million. After legal fees, I was left with approximately $3.2 million. I could have kept it all, bought a nice house somewhere, lived comfortably. But that was never what this was about. I've used the money to establish the Grandmother's Coast Research Foundation. The cottage has been renovated to accommodate up to 4 graduate students at a time, with a proper laboratory facility in the converted garage, updated research equipment, and living quarters that maintain the cottage's historic character while providing modern amenities for researchers. The foundation provides free housing and research support for marine biology students studying climate change effects on coastal ecosystems. The first doctoral student moved in last month. She's studying ocean acidification effects on native mussel populations. 3 more students start next semester, including one studying the very tide pools that Coastal Premier Development wanted to destroy for a luxury resort. We've also established a high school outreach program. Every week, students from local schools come to learn about marine biology, climate science, and conservation. Last month, a 16-year-old girl told me she decided to become a marine biologist after spending a day studying our tide pools. She reminded me of myself at that age, full of wonder at the complex world revealed in each pool of seawater. The other victims have found various forms of justice. The elderly couple got their cottage back plus $500,000 in damages. They cried when they walked through their door again. 15 other families recovered their properties or received compensation totaling over $20 million. The city has implemented new oversight measures requiring 3 independent signatures on any code violation exceeding $5,000, and all violations must include photographic evidence and GPS coordinates of the supposed infraction. My sister's children visit sometimes. Their father brings them to the cottage, where they help with research projects and learn about marine life. They don't know the full story of what their mother did. They just know she made bad choices and had to go away. Maybe someday they'll understand. For now, I try to be the aunt who teaches them what their grandmother taught me. That some things have value beyond money, that nature deserves our protection, and that doing the right thing matters even when it's hard. Final update: 6 months after the original post. My sister reported to federal prison last week. I didn't go to see her off. Her ex-husband told me she spent her last days of freedom still insisting she was the real victim, that everyone else was overreacting to standard business practices. Even facing 12 years in prison, she never understood what she'd truly lost. The research station is thriving. We've published 3 papers in peer-reviewed journals using data collected from our tide pools. One of my students discovered that certain barnacle species here are adapting to temperature changes faster than anywhere else on the Pacific coast, possibly indicating evolution in real time. This research wouldn't exist if my cottage had become part of a resort. The Coastal Premier Development CEO was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison for leading the conspiracy. He must also pay $15 million in restitution. The FBI investigation revealed this wasn't his first scheme. He'd run similar operations in coastal communities from Maine to California, always targeting inherited properties owned by people with limited resources to fight back. Last week, I received a letter from one of the victims, an elderly woman whose husband had built their cottage after returning from World War II. She nearly lost it to false violations until our case exposed the scheme. She wrote, "These aren't just properties, they're repositories of love, memory, and connection. Thank you for fighting not just for your cottage but for all of us who were targeted by greed." The cottage looks almost exactly as it did when my grandmother lived here. The sea glass window still catches the morning light, throwing blue and green patterns across the walls. The rose bushes she planted still bloom each spring. The driftwood sculptures still stand in the garden. But now the garage hosts sophisticated monitoring equipment measuring water temperature, pH levels, and microplastic concentrations. The spare bedroom has become a library of research papers and field guides. The kitchen table where my grandmother once graded papers now holds microscopes and specimen containers. I think about her often. She was a teacher who believed in the power of education to change the world. She brought hundreds of students to these tide pools over her career, teaching them to observe carefully, to respect nature, and to understand that we're all connected to the ocean whether we live beside it or not. She would be proud that her cottage has become a center for research and education. The tide pools themselves remain unchanged by all this human drama. The sea anemones still wave their tentacles in the current. The hermit crabs still exchange shells in their eternal game. The octopuses still hide in their crevices, emerging at night to hunt. They don't care about property values or development schemes or family betrayal. They just need their habitat preserved. As I write this final update, I'm sitting at my research station, watching the sunset through that sea glass window my sister claimed was a structural hazard. For graduate students are processing samples in the lab. High school volunteers are updating our species database. The local news is doing a story on our climate change research. The cottage that someone tried to steal through corruption has become exactly what it was meant to be, a bridge between human understanding and the natural world. My sister chose quick money over family, community, and integrity. She lost everything, her freedom, her family, her reputation, and ultimately, her humanity. She'll spend the next decade in federal prison while I spend it doing work that matters, in a place that was saved not by its monetary value but by its irreplaceable worth to science and education. The ocean continues its eternal rhythm outside my window. Each wave brings new mysteries to explore and old truths to confirm. The research continues, the students learn, and the tide pools endure. This is how it should be. This is what was worth fighting for. Some things can't be measured in dollars. Some betrayals can't be forgiven. And sometimes, justice actually prevails. Thank you to everyone who supported this fight. The cottage stands firm, the research continues, and the coast remains protected. That's the only update that really matters.